Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm Rob Kelman. I think a lot of you on the channel know me, on the Zoom call know me. I've got an Agile training company and coaching company out in Farmington Hills, Michigan. Coming to you live from actually Keego Harbor. We're all coming from home right now. If everybody can remember to mute the mic, unless when it comes to Q&A, then we'll open it up and you guys can then ask Joe some questions. So we'll, a brief intro to what we've got going right now. Joe Justice trains and coaches companies all over the globe and to become hardware Agile companies. He founded, and I'm sure he's going to talk a lot about this, founded WikiSpeed. They designed and manufactured a car using Scrum, and he's arguably the most sought after Agile coach around. He works not just with auto manufacturers, but also with AI, pharmaceutical, aerospace, and of course, major software companies. I'm gonna let him talk more about his experience. He has some slides, we'll go over it. But first, I wanted to give you all a few words about me and why I chose this topic and why it's gonna be the first of many of our Agile meetups. I'm gonna do a series of Agile meetups with a bunch of certified Scrum trainers and coaches that I know. And Joe, if you can, you can flash the first picture. That picture, and it feels weird talking about this, but that's me. And unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know how you want to view it. I was among the first in the wave of people in Metro Detroit to contract COVID-19, which is, it's really weird to hear me say it out loud, but that was me at Henry Ford Hospital. Go figure, I can't win the lottery, and I played the lotto before, but I get this. I mean, whatever, it just hit me. Before we get too far, I'm fine. I'm proof that you can recover from it. My energy's back up. I can breathe. I'm one of the fortunate ones where, I had a hospital visit, but I actually recovered from it. It was brutal, and I'm going to spare you the details as you're here to learn more from Joe about Agile manufacturing. But what the doctors first told me was influenza A turned into, a visit to Henry Ford Hospital and an x-ray so they could diagnose me with pneumonia, which was not fun. And I had to wait 2 weeks for the results for that COVID test, mostly because the capacity of test in mid-March really wasn't that strong. If you look at the second picture, Joe, you want to flip to that one? Yeah, that is, if you haven't been tested yet, this is what you might experience if you go to one of the drive-through testing centers. And that was when I did my second round of testing to prove that I was negative, and I'm fine, thank God. But a side note total from all of this, a friend of mine who's pretty active in the Agile community in Detroit helped open up the first COVID-19 testing center at the Detroit Fairgrounds. And he did it using Scrum, which I thought was pretty amazing. And that's going to be a story for a meetup down the road. But it's a great success story for those of you who use Scrum. I mean, it's amazing what you can do. It's not just for IT. I started to think, what can I do to help my hometown? Detroit's always been my hometown. And as I'm lying in bed, just sweating buckets, I think, okay, I'm going to get back on my feet. I'm going to recover. How can I help everybody in the community, my Agile friends, the community at large? And most of the Agile classes that I've delivered over the years have been IT focused. Go figure, the Agile Manifesto was created by a bunch of programmers and coders, IT guys. So Detroit's heavy in manufacturing, and I thought, okay, manufacturing's in a transition. We need to pivot and adapt to operate successfully in this new coronavirus reality we're in. And Joe delivers workshops, and he coaches teams using hardware examples as opposed to IT examples. He coaches hardware teams how to work safely while increasing productivity. And right now, I believe Detroit needs that. Detroit manufacturing needs this while we all deal with this COVID-19 reality. So that's my story and why I wanted to start with something that I thought would be useful for the manufacturing community here in Detroit area and globally. I mean, there's people on the call from overseas, actually. Joe, if you want, that's my little start. Go for it.
Wow, Rob. I bet I speak for a lot of the people that are dialed in to say we're really glad that you say you're healthy again and your energy's back. And everybody, I was lucky enough to be having some planning talks with Rob for this gathering, and then also for some Scrum hardware, Scrum manufacturing classes we're doing in August. And Rob told me what he went through with his COVID, and it was graphic. It was heavy. I'll circle back on why I think that really matters for us in a moment. I've got a running theory that we as Agilists, people who know how to do Agile stuff well, are driving the manufacturing response to COVID-19 globally, all around the world. And I'll try to explain what I mean and how we on this call, I believe, are the best answer to better, stronger companies in manufacturing coming out of this. And I mean every single person on this conference call, on this Zoom, from the Agile curious to the Agile experts. Please allow me to dive in as to why. I'm Joe Justice. You might have seen me on TEDx or the Discovery Channel. You might have seen me on the Primetime News. I'm lucky enough to have been on Good Morning America, USA Today, Fox News, internationally, the Asahi Shimbun and Nikkei, the two major publications in Japan. The reason why is the work I've been doing with Agile in aerospace and manufacturing, and my personal passion is automotive. I started by launching a car company to say, could this Agile stuff even work? And we got down to 1 week sprints, designing a new car, building, testing, and selling road legal in 1 week sprints. That set 4 world records, and that earned me the interest of CNN, Money, Fortune, Forbes, Harvard Business Review, etc. And through that, I got to work with Lockheed Martin, with Ariane Space Group, with a rocket company in California that you may know, but I can't name, etc. I was in Switzerland when COVID was announced. I was actually teaching a Scrum hardware class. I had just skipped Milan because Milan, Italy had just closed because of something called novel coronavirus. And so my class, it was a almost sold out class, got delayed until they said, oh, we'll run it in June, but we're closing the city of Milan for some reason. Oh, that's strange. Okay, well, I'll go to the next stop. I'll go to Switzerland. And while I was there, the Swiss government announced voluntary lockdown, and in 2 days, all flights in or out, international flights, would have mandatory quarantine. So I left. I went back to my apartment in Tokyo. And while I was in Tokyo, Tokyo announced voluntary quarantine, and all flights were going to have 2 weeks quarantine on the way in, way out. So I flew back to my house in Seattle, and that's where I am. I landed on my daughter's birthday, and I made a video clip in the Seattle airport.
Happy birthday, Sana. It's Papa. I just arrived in Seattle in the United States, and I would love to see you and play with you for your birthday. Papa wants to make sure he's not sick, so he's going to stay, I think, at Aunt Debbie and Uncle G's house for 2 weeks above their garage, where he's not so close to anybody in case he's sick, to not share germs. I'm making the video right now because I just landed, and right now I feel great. But I'm about to put a mask on so nobody would even see my face.
And I proceeded to have burning lung symptoms and get really freaked out. My brother-in-law's brother died that week from COVID. I didn't. I went to a test center. I was really impressed by how rapidly it was stood up. I was in Washington, just north of Seattle. The car drove up, and I was in the rear of the car. I was picked up by my brother-in-law, wearing a mask and gloves, and like kitchen gloves, and a hood. And I rolled down the window, and out of this tent you see in the picture below, a health worker walked up to me, full suit, mask, booties. All I could see was her eyes behind a face shield, and she was shaking. I was terrified too. She was clearly as scared or more scared than I was. And what really impressed me was that these people were volunteering their time to conduct these tests, and they were terrified. And they were doing the very best they could. By the way, the swabber did an excellent job. It only took one test. It didn't waste any test materials. And lucky for me, my test came out negative. I still don't know why I had the lung irritation that I had, the lung burning that I had, but the test came back negative. I started following how people were rolling out rapid infrastructure for what could be a global pandemic, which it grew to be. And I saw in the Midwest, where I'm from, construction groups having new modular pieces of hospitals in 3 weeks from the design. It was a radically different pace of construction. Like the testing center that I was tested in, which was stood up in days, now even more permanent, more durable, severe weather rated clinic space and hospital space was being stood up in 3 weeks. And I'd like to read the comment I made on this news article. Looking great, modular and redeployable, road legal size or smaller, makes for some of the best agility in construction, fastest deploy and iteration improvement speeds, and can be one of the lowest cost methods too, depending on how the design, test, and manufacturing is organized. We were seeing companies move way faster. And when we look at what companies are doing when they're way faster, what's interesting is we see what Agilists have been doing in software for, in some cases, more than 2 decades. And we saw global manufacturing centered around automotive stepping up to make this work. General Motors reported going from idea to making ventilators, assembling ventilators of existing design in 3 weeks. Their goal was volume, 30K units by August. We don't know if they'll hit it or not, but I love the direction. Toyota USA went from idea to tooled mass production. So not just assembly, in this case, even mass production. What Toyota does well, they applied a phenomenal level of lean, and they did it in 3 weeks. Tesla did what Tesla does well. They innovated. They went from an idea to a new ventilator design. They recorded the Sprint version 2 demo and put it on YouTube, and they did that in 3 weeks. All of these are efforts that matter, and all of these are efforts that Agile coaches, which I think is a lot of the people on this call and Agile interested, could support. Here's the team at Toyota. What they did is first they checked with the customer, a good Agile customer-centered tactic. They reached out to hospitals and said, what do you really need? What will really help you? They used that to refine their designs. They 3D printed prototypes. The hospitals verified, yes, this is what we want. They then 3D printed mass production tooling. Before those tools wore out, the legitimate production tooling had arrived. So they went into mass production essentially immediately with tooling that will deteriorate rapidly, but it lasted long enough to wait until the production tooling arrived. And this is radically faster than traditional phase gate manufacturing. It sounds like Agile, right? And in fact, it is. The lead of this program is coached by the person I coached at Toyota USA, Mike Trollmans, and he is an Agile advocate across Toyota USA. Then we see Tesla's timeline, very similar. The first thing they do on March 18th is they evaluated what capabilities they had, and they said SpaceX makes basically ventilators in the life support systems, and Tesla makes HVAC systems in the cars, including their own heat pumps. We think we can do this. The next day, the board of Tesla has a conference call with hospitals to say, what do you really need? Again, checking with the customer. They get confirmation of what they really need. They immediately buy available different types of breathing assistance gear and deliver it. You can see some of the timeline there. Then on on March 25th, they begin design in-house. They've already been speaking with the arguably best performing ventilators in the world. They get permission to open source the designs, which they do. And then Tesla says, can we do better? Is what they're gonna try to do. That happened March 25th. Then April 5th, they post Sprint 2 demo, of a working new ventilator. So we see an ultra high pace of hardware, and they're doing exactly what fast software teams are doing. They shorten the feedback loop by having the same people that do the design do the test. Now in manufacturing, that's not the way it usually happens. You have design people and they farm out test to reduce cost. So design doesn't have a speed incentive. They take months. Well, in a crisis, that's not quick enough to preserve human life. So they start being agile out of necessity. They start having the same people design as test. They co-locate the test hardware fixtures at the point of design. So they have people doing 3D drawings of CAD and CAM. They're also doing simulated testing. So for hardware, that's computational fluid dynamics, which is software, and finite element analysis, which is also software. And they run on the same laptops. Then they have the physical test machines in the same room. Then they only contract suppliers that will deliver in a week or less. And interestingly, there's hundreds of those suppliers already. They're just not the cheapest. Well, when the cost justifies it, like human life, it all fits in a 1-week sprint, which is what these companies are doing. You can see the demo video here. Interestingly, it's that proven consistency of rapid innovation that's been apparently linking to the companies whose stock price recovers the fastest. The market rewards value, it looks like, with the companies that are iterating the fastest. Now, how did these projects work? And how can Agilists help make this part of the new normal if that's what we want? These projects suffered from a worst case scenario of project management. There were changing requirements even late in development. There were no defined processes and tools for the response. There was lack of clear contracts and there was no agreed plan. And still, these projects shipped 5,200% faster than business as usual, and customers supported they were extraordinarily happy, far more than satisfied. Why is that? I'd like to thank the Agile Business Institute for giving me permission to use some of the internal training materials here in this public forum. It looks like manufacturing monotasking worked. These teams worked on one project at a time. They worked on just COVID. And here's how that works. In traditional manufacturing, you have a separate design group, a separate test group, a separate costing group, a separate mechanical engineering, a separate software engineering, a separate embedded software. And they work on several projects at once. In this model, here's 3. Let's compare it to monotasking like happened in COVID response. If there's only 3 projects being shipped between, project A ships 500% faster, B 250% faster, and C 167% faster. The issue is these manufacturing companies like GM, Ford, Toyota, Tesla, Skoda, Volvo, Porsche, they were working on more than 27 projects at once. So when they switched to one, they were over 5,000% faster. So that's one. And this is something Agilists have been practicing for a long time. Now we have the movement of companies reopening, booting up, trying to figure out what the new abnormal is. We have Ford prototyping wristbands that vibrate if you're closer than 2 meters to another employee. We're seeing temperature checks at shift start, social distancing with markers on the floor, shadow boxing, and plastic partitions between workstations. And we're seeing extra shift time allotted for people to hygienically clean their tools and stations before shift change. Well, as these companies begin to target opening dates, it may be useful to see what are the possible risks and how is Agile basically going to rescue a bunch of people is the case I'm going to try to make with us. The CDC keeps going back and forth on whether there's a likely second wave based on previous pandemics, and we don't know. The statement goes back and forth. Some of the times it's doom and gloom. Some of the time it's going to be fine. I've been speaking with my colleagues around the world. My partner that I was going to do a class with in Milan that got moved, Paolo Samichelli, he says Italy's lockdown started 4 weeks before the USA. And he tells me that the policy response of the companies in Italy and the companies in the US and Switzerland and Japan and Germany followed the same progression. He used something that's very popular with us Agilists, the responsibility process by Christopher Avery. And he maps the politician's response and the large company's response to this process, and they're all the same. What he's shown is that the trajectory Italy's on is the same one the USA is on, but 4 weeks ahead. So I said, Paolo, you're in my future. What's going to happen for manufacturing? And he said, in each case, there's eventually been forced shutdowns and now phased reopenings, with gathering places being the last to open. So he says, sorry, sports fans. And here's what he told me. He said, in Italy, what happens when a factory floor professional has an elevated temperature? And he says, that individual is quarantined and tested. And since the tests aren't 100% accurate, they're required to be in quarantine for a week so they can be tested twice, a second time at the end of the week. And if both tests pass, they're allowed to go to work. But here's what's happened 4 weeks ahead of the USA as companies actually went back online. Unless the company can prove that that person wasn't in contact with anyone else, all those other people get quarantined as well. So for 1 week, your whole team gets quarantined. And in fact, it's more disruptive than that. For 1 week, your whole shift gets quarantined. And in fact, it's more disruptive than that. They can't prove isolation across shifts. So entire buildings get shut down every time someone goes in for a COVID test. Well, what are the odds of that? Here's the problem. They get tested every time they show COVID-like symptoms. So that's every time someone gets the flu, which is a much wider likelihood than anyone getting COVID. That's every time someone has a severe allergic reaction and a coughing fit, which is a far more likely scenario than anyone getting COVID. These companies are already financially strained. We're seeing mass layoffs everywhere. I don't mean to be all doom and gloom, but this is the real world we're in right now. This is a really tense financial situation for a lot of companies all around the world. And we don't know how many companies can survive a second wave, if there is one, of intermittent, unplanned shutdowns every time a single shift employee has the flu or COVID, or for any reason displays COVID-like symptoms. So what are we going to do? McKinsey thinks they've got the answer. They call it a network of teams. Technologists are looking at that and saying, that's like active systems. And that's like what hardware systems do now and server farms do now. That's like a highly available network, but of teams. And Agilists are looking at the solution and saying, we know all about that. That's what we call Agile. I'd like to make the mapping for us. I think we're going to save the day here, or we can if we want to. The emerging solution seems to be working in isolated, autonomous, small teams. Agilists have been doing this for a long time. We're really good at optimizing performance and guiding organizations and groups to doing this well. Then there's a remote shift change of meetings. Well, Agile teams have gotten pretty good at this world of remote work now. So if these teams that have to be working physically, manufacturing teams, they've got to be there touching the part. If they then do the shift change meeting remote, that's something Agilists can help them do. We're really good at that. And in fact, I'll go a step beyond and say the format, or if you want to be rote about it, even the scripts of these shift exchange meetings for high value and removing impediments and replanning are really well known. I'll recommend the MetaScrum pattern by Jim Coplien as a great place to start. Then increasing production by reducing handoffs, cross-training, and developing full stack hardware teams capable of completing and testing an entire project modules in team. We're really good at that, because if these teams are now working isolated, they can't hand off parts easily between teams. So what's faster flow, if we're just doing Toyota flow optimization, faster flow is for the team to get more work done in team. That creates cross-functionality and starts creating full stack teams. Well, Agilists know a lot about that and can coach these manufacturing teams. We know how to explain what T-shaped is in terms of skill. We know how to explain modular architecture, or some of us are really skilled at that. And by the way, it's the same in hardware. If you want information about that, email me. I'll email you the Scrum hardware guide, and it's hardware architecture templates for modularity in hardware and contract versus design. Then these isolated autonomous teams prioritize their own shift activities. They need to, they're isolated and autonomous, and they conduct their own impediment removal, their own continuous improvement. Well, that starts to sound a whole lot like a product owner role or a prioritization role and a Scrum Master role. And again, that's something we know really well. And it looks like the answer, according to McKinsey and technologists, is doing this in manufacturing. It ends up looking something like this. It's a lot like the Spotify model we learned from Henrik Nieberg, and then my best friend, Paul Tacken, rolled out all across ING Bank, except I've modified it a little bit for hardware. I call it Group Scrum, call it whatever you want, use it however you want. And it's the teams each work on a module of hardware. That seems to be the highest flow in what I've been learning doing this since 2006 in my hobby company, Wikispeed. So these teams, they each own a module, a piece of the hardware with a known stable interface, and the modules are grouped together by a release, what hardware needs to go together for a releasable component, whether that be an update, a response packet for a recall, or whether it's an entire product. And of course, quality circles and community practices still fit, just like Toyota's been doing, and just like many Spotify model companies have been doing it. And that's exactly what Wikispeed ran since 2006. And we set 4 world records that way. It looks like this could be the time where it's necessary to keep manufacturing plants open. In Wikispeed, when we tried this, the fastest we got was designing, manufacturing, and testing a car in 27 minutes. That was the absolute fastest we got. What we learned there is if it were a standard operating procedure, we want a robot to do that. And if it wasn't an SOP, that's where we wanted humans involved. And then we traced impediment removal through our Scrum Masters. Here's one of my clients doing it. In week 1, they identified a piece of hardware. Well, they identified a problem. It was with locomotives parked on, freight locomotives parked in locomotive yards. They took an off-the-shelf Bosch part, attached it to freight locomotives, and tested it with customers in 1 week. That was sprint 1. They validated the idea. Here's the next 4 sprints for 5 sprints total. These are each 1 week. The part on the far right was with a sprint demo at the end of week 5, and it went to market. So this is idea to market in 5 weeks. This is teams really doing exactly what we were just talking about in hardware. Here's simple to-dos. This is Agile Coaching 101, and this is all for hardware. So I think this is all stuff many people on the call are familiar with, and some of you have done, and you can do this now to help your manufacturing teams. One, if you want buy-in from the teams to try this, and you want to build engagement from top management and the people doing it, I'd recommend rotating the product owner, the Scrum Master, and the team member roles each sprint. It breaks up the concept of perceived hierarchy, and it starts to create the real Agile mindset, not just mapping roles. Then I'll recommend run the happiness retrospective. Scale of 1 to 5, how happy were you last sprint? There's many details of that. You can read it in the Harvard Business Review article on my work called Why John Deere Measures Employee Happiness Every 2 weeks. Then eliminate suggestions that are outside the ability or agreement of what we should do in the next sprint. So all that's left are suggestions that the team agrees would make them happier, that the team agrees they could do next sprint. Then put the top voted item at the top of the backlog so the team does it next sprint. Drive up happiness. This way, it makes the change tolerable. In fact, it makes the change fun and exciting. And in manufacturing, think about software in the 1980s. This is really revolutionary. And a lot of people are really uncomfortable with the idea. I'm finding by leading with fun and implementing the Agile mindset, we get the win without alienating people. So how to get executive support? When I'm doing an Agile transformation, and I'm working with the executives of a group, I'll ask for their key performance indicators and their OKRs, and I'll put those at the top of a backlog. And I'll put executive names on each one if they'll let me. Then I ask the teams to self-organize around those KPIs and OKRs. And then I run the MetaScrum pattern as written by Jim Coplien. That way we get ideas from the bottom up of are these the right KPIs and OKRs. So it's not just top down, and we build the Agile mindset, we build that empowerment. Then whatever's high priority, we have teams already organized around. This solves for Conway's law, and then we map it to the hardware modules. Of course, that triggers a technology change. We're going to be using different machines if we want parts within 1 week. It's not all additive manufacturing, but it definitely has a place. And the supply chain gets made shorter. Whether that's a company across the street or a company a time zone away, The trick seems to be they have to be able to deliver within a week, or else the sprint length is too long for a meaningful feedback loop, morale drops, and when they go back to the way they used to be working. Folks, thanks so much. I think Agilists can and should drive the manufacturer's response to COVID. I think the people here are some of the best qualified in the world to do that. You're already in manufacturing companies, making furniture, making cars, consulting to them. And I think you've seen some ways you might plug in to solve it. I'd like to give extraordinary thanks to Paolo San Michele in Italy for being very transparent about what's working there, which I've tried to gel the best of here into this call with all of you. And I really thank you for your time. I'd love to see if there are any questions. After we see if there are any questions, I've asked Rob to try doing breakouts so people can talk to each other in groups of maybe 3 and build a network of, if you want to do any of this, how you want to do it, and introduce yourselves to each other. If the breakout rooms work and we don't accidentally hang up on everybody, then you're invited to come back with any questions or comments that you refined in the breakout sessions for a second wave of Q&A if you have time. With that, Rob, I'll mute myself and turn it over to you. We'll see if there are any questions or comments. And email me anytime if you want a copy of the Scrum Hardware Guide. My email's at the bottom of this slide and every slide if you did screen capture. It's joejustice0@gmail.com. That's the number 0, it's not an O. Also, my Twitter is @joejustice0, and you can tweet me anytime about anything, and I'll send you information if I've got it. And I'm wishing all of us an awesome outcome to this.
Right. Well, I think we could do, I don't know the order of questions, but if you have a question, maybe just hit a chat. Let me know if you want to do that, and I'll call you out so we don't have everybody talking on top of each other. If anybody has a question or thought, of course, there's no pressure to, but let's see. Any questions? Any thoughts, any suggestions for Joe? All right. Let me see. Jeff has got a question. Jeff Yaros, you can unmute yourself and ask a question to Joe.
Or to Rob. I mean, ask a question to anybody, or Chet. Yeah. I mean, we've got some people who have been doing this for decades. There's a lot of experience on the call. So please ask anybody. Rob, me, Chet, any of the other experts.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the time and the ability to answer the question, and the presentation was really interesting. I'm not in manufacturing. I work at Blue Cross Blue Shield. So it's healthcare, of course. And one thing that I moved from an IT area to a business area about 4 years ago. So I'm curious as to the response that the manufacturing teams did with the help of their business partners, so to speak, the healthcare workers, how that worked. Like, did they actually, do you know if they actually sat down and prioritized the list of things that need to happen for the building out of those shields and masks? How did they accept that? I mean, everyone's in a crisis mode, so they probably were looking for anything, but I find that the business sometimes has a hard time understanding the need to do some of the ceremonies.
Oh, I dig it. It was exactly product backlog refinement and sprint planning in Toyota's case, and in Tesla's case is the best of what I've seen about it. In Ford's case, it was a face-to-face whiteboarding session, and it looks a lot like product backlog refinement. Sorry, in GM's case. Now, that said, as far as I know, only Toyota had trained Agilists in the room. Tesla, they're Agile natives. So, I mean, it's very much product backlog refinement explicitly as well. But as far as I know, only Toyota had formally trained folks running it as an event, or much more like an event. So the point I want to make here is, I think all of this could be even way, way better than that if the Agile experienced folks in the room joined in these conversations and were invited in, and earned a good enough reputation in hardware to be invited in. So I think there's opportunity. But yes, my understanding is it was exactly at least clumsy versions of the formal work, is my understanding.
Thank you so much.
Good. Let's see, I've got another one. Amapreet Kaur is asking if you could elaborate on the MetaScrum pattern.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a book that I'll recommend. It's called A Scrum Book. It is the actual title, by many authors contributing together. Jim Coplien spearheaded it, so his name is also on the book, as it should be. In that book, one of the patterns is the MetaScrum pattern. How that works is everyone required to make a decision. So you have people at the level of procurement to determine what level of funding they have access to and what suppliers are allowed. If it will potentially impact the amount of funding, you have folks that have signatory authority to release funding must be in the room. So once you have everyone required to make the decisions that you're checking in the room, and all the people doing the work, all of them. So this isn't a closed door management meeting. This is a people who do the work meeting with anyone who still has the keys to limit decisions. They're all in one room together. The MetaScrum pattern then says the new goal is disseminated, and to the point that the budget's been agreed, the agreed suppliers have been agreed, et cetera, and the backlog has been refined and given the go-ahead. What I'll add to that, working in hardware companies, is it's a two-way conversation. The bottom up has to be invited, or else they get alienated and morale drops. So the bottom has to, wow, that sounds awful of me to say. In a traditional top-down company, that's how they're referred to, which is just absolutely disrespectful. So I'll say the people who are actually doing the work are asked, do we have the right goals? And also another step here that seems completely necessary, but Jim didn't write it, but I'll talk to him about it and hope it can be updated. And if not, you can get the Scrum hardware guide, is to agree which module each team works on. So a very high level course architecture of the hardware problem is agreed on, at least on a whiteboard in this meeting. And everybody signs the bottom of the whiteboard, and it's dated, and everybody takes a picture, and a picture is put on the company share for future architectural review. Who agreed on the general idea at what date? That stands up to law, even in life critical systems. So that's the MetaScrum pattern. It's a financial replanning where teams re-agree what is the overall goal and what's their goal that's a part of it. And in hardware, a team's goal that's a part of it is a hardware module. And that includes embedded software or software app support.
So, okay, let's see. I have another question. Thank you. And first, did Joe give you a full answer that you're looking for? If you have any questions, you can chat it. But she says yes. Good job, Joe. Shannon has a question. I don't know if you see her chat question there. I'll read it. Some of you are on the phone. Do you think when we have a vaccine, many workers will still continue to wear masks or shields? I'm assuming other companies, especially in the manufacturing areas, will continue to make shields and will assess the quality to make those shields more efficient, most efficient.
So remember, I guess it depends on where all of us grew up, but I grew up in the Midwest, and I remember food packing folks not wearing gloves when I was a kid, touching raw meat, touching vegetables. And now that's much less normal. In fact, that's illegal in some types of food prep. But I remember going to sandwich shops and having a sandwich made or a hot dog made, and there was no glove involved. And now there is. And it's a little gross to think about someone handling raw meat or eggs or the sandwich they just made me without wearing gloves. Well, I think the same thing's going to happen with face shields. And I think a cultural shift that epidemiologists have wanted for a long time is likely happening. Now, I spent the last year living in Tokyo, and Tokyo has been like that or much closer to that for a long time. Yes, people are crammed right on top of each other, basically, in the subway. But in actual workstations, it's a very high level of hygiene. And that's part of why handshaking is not in vogue. It's because of potential disease transmission as part of it. A lot of this comes out of surviving previous epidemics on a small island. And what's weird is I was in a grocery store a few weeks ago wearing a mask and gloves. And the way people were moving around me in the grocery store in the United States was much more similar to the pattern of movement people move around in Tokyo. they're staying right about 2 meters or right about 6 feet away, or they're trying to as people are shopping. And it's becoming, I realize there's cultures who have already had that baked in. And Japan's the 3rd largest economy in the world as a nation. So it shows that it works. It can be compatible with making good money on the global scale as well. So I think this will be part of the new normal. Some of these hygiene steps, some levels of social distancing. But I don't know. That's a sociologist angle, but that's the angle I suspect. I think personal protective equipment is going to be part of the new normal, like we're seeing gloves for food processing officials. I think we're going to see masks and face shields too in a lot of companies for a long time. And I think the overall number of unhealthy days and general physical health of life in the world will likely improve to some level, is what I hope. But that's my take. And I'll be really interested to hear from epidemiologists, sociologists, and HR governing bodies who have much more direct to say about that one.
Good. And we have another question. Bob is typing in Zoom chat, so I'm going to read it out loud for the people on the phone so they can hear it. What is your opinion of how companies are or will be returning to the office and holding Scrum ceremonies, co-located teams, etc., giving distancing guidelines? Is the open collaborative co-located team dead?
So. Wow. Well, there was a poll done in the UK, and it said only 9% of survey respondents said they wanted the world to turn their work to go back to the way it was before. And we're seeing similar sentiments globally, where most people don't want to go back to working in an intimately close space. Now, some people do, 9% did, but most didn't. So I'm not sure if people will opt in. Now, that said, there's a level of energy and speed that only happens when we're co-located. It's true. It's better for speed. It's better for collaboration. I think what that shows is the gap in current remote tools. Right now, for a lot of people, they think Zoom is the state of the art, the best product. Google's trying to give them a run for their money. So is Microsoft, and so are a lot of other firms. And there's a big room for improvement because there's still a significant gap in productivity. So I think it'll trigger better remote tools, is my opinion. I do think manufacturing is where we're going to see physically co-located teams, where it's actual hardware. And hardware, let me make it a little more broad. Healthcare response, we have to keep seeing, for now, until robotics are amazing, co-located physical teams. And when we're moving stuff and touching stuff and not just pushing bits, it's got to be. And so I think that pure Agile Scrum room, physical space, is going to be reborn in manufacturing. And that brings me to, I think, a very important risk. What would happen if we went back into the first Scrum room in 1994 and saw how messy it was? And knowing all we know now in all these years, multiple decades of practicing agility, and could teach that first Scrum team in 1994, how different would the world of IT and software, and now eventually the whole world be? Well, that's where manufacturing is right now. They're just trying to figure out working in these network of teams, in these highly available team architecture. And if they don't have a skillful Agile coach, I think we're going to see some really bad Scrum. Because I think those are the places where we're going to be seeing the actual physical working in person. But for a lot of bit pushing teams, myself included, I think we're going to be remote a much higher percentage of the time. And I think most people are going to choose that.
Okay. This next question also from Bob. This is going to be interesting. You're a certified Scrum trainer, Joe. You're also an authorized Scrum at Scale trainer. So the question, your description of MetaScrum sounds different than Scrum at Scale, your definition of it. Can you compare and contrast the differences?
Oh, sure. Yeah. The Scrum at Scale guide has two brilliant novel aspects. well, novel to scaled Agile teams. And less has some phenomenal attributes. And the Scaled Agile framework has some amazing practices inside. I try not to be glued to any given marketing name and try to apply what's effectively working. The Scrum at Scale's two strengths, because that was the specific ask of the question, are attempting to grow linear growth, whereas you add teams. Like if you have one team getting X amount done and you add 10 teams, you should get 11 times as much done. But there's that has never happened in the world of work. And the Scrum at Scale guide attempts to achieve that. And they do that by, well, how to say it the right way. The way it's written in the current rev of the Scrum at Scale guide isn't compatible with hardware. I hope this will be changed soon, but it doesn't allocate teams per module, which is how you get closer to linear scaling, which is the goal. Then the second part of the goal of the radical attribution, the radical advancement that Scrum at Scale is trying to make happen in the world of work, is scale-free architecture. And that's as you get bigger and bigger, you don't add complexity. Well, it hasn't been successful yet. It's adding additional layers of hierarchy. There's now a product owner team, there's a Scrum Master team. So they're adding additional functions, which is the definition of not a scale-free architecture. That said, I think it'll pivot. I think it'll get fixed. Until that happens, it gets too bloated to deliver hardware too fast, just being transparent. So what seems to be working is something that's almost the same. I mean, the differences are almost zero. And actually the difference between it and less are almost zero. And the differences between it and parts of the Scaled Agile framework are almost zero. It's teams, that makes sense. And they each work on a module. That's the part that's novel. And I don't think it's mind-breakingly novel, but it is novel. I think it's important for speed. And they run an event that's attended by all members of the team. So there's no need for a product owner team. We're trying to keep scale-free architecture, right? Not adding complexity as we grow. So that means you can't have another team because you got bigger. You can only have additional working teams. So that's what scale-free means. So to do that, those teams that share an interface, so in these modules, they have interfaces, so you know which modules they connect to. They have a shared event together. So there's no additional team. They just talk directly and they say, do we need to make any changes to the interface? Yes or no? If so, do we agree what those are? And then we update the spec and we build. And we make the new test. It's all TDD. Then those teams have a regular cadence of shared impediment removal because the impediments often go across modular interface. This is also true in software too, by the way, when you have object-oriented software, which we all do. So the teams work on an object. When these objects are actual business objects, the way somebody like Jim Coplien would describe them. So they're big, complex things. Then a team owns one. So in Microsoft Excel, for example, I'm talking about something as big as the spreadsheet object. And these are big. And for cars, I'm talking about something as big as the infotainment system, like the hardware and the software of it. That's something that a nimble, diverse, cross-functional team would own. So these are big things, and we're talking about high levels of cross-functionality. And they run a shared impediment removal meeting. The best I've seen so far is the Scaled Daily Scrum. Then they'll run a reprioritization meeting and funding meeting, and the best I've seen so far as a base is the MetaScrum pattern. And that's it. Well, there's a shared demo and a shared retrospective and a shared product backlog refinement and a shared sprint planning, and you do all 5 of the events scaled, and you're done. So it's not identical to any of the existing frameworks, but it's almost zero gap. And I believe the part that's going to make the biggest difference if you roll this out is having teams allocated per module and having clear interfaces.
Okay, so that's
Thank you.
I didn't mean to get too nerdy there. Sorry. And you can tweet to me anytime if you agree or disagree or want more of my opinion or my learning. And you can email me if you want to be private about it. But typically better to be open So Twitter's better, or LinkedIn.
Yeah, I have another question. This is going to be a counter question, I guess. I agree Agile works well in small groups, but how to collaborate with each team when it comes to large companies with so many Scrum teams? Isn't Scrum of Scrums kind of going back to the traditional hierarchy way of working? So it's...
Scrum of Scrums is going back to the traditional hierarchy way of working where it can be. Now, there's really good ways to do it, and expert coaches do it while avoiding hierarchy. It happens. But the pattern itself is a hierarchical piece. And if that's not coached around, yeah, it goes back to the previous way of working. So the goal is to do what these really quick companies are doing. In software, you see it all over. In hardware, the only places I see it are basically the Musk companies. You go into a great big room of all people working at the same level, and they have mass meetings with a particular protocol to avoid more than 5 people talking at once. You can see this, for example, if you go to SpaceX hiring page, and here's why I think SpaceX is a good example. The United Launch Alliance makes rockets. That's Boeing and Lockheed Martin and some other supporting companies. And they're, in 2 years, they made a section of their next rocket, and it was something like $10 billion. The exact numbers are in my Twitter if you want to reference it. SpaceX makes a whole rocket a week for $10 million. Like, that's how different the speed is here. That's why I think this is a good example. It's that radically faster, cheaper, higher quality, higher capability. The mission profile is dramatically larger for the SpaceX rockets as well. So that's why I think this is a good example. If you go to their hiring page and you look under corporate, so where you'd expect to find management positions, the only jobs under corporate are baristas and chefs. That's it. They don't have management. They don't have it. It doesn't exist. And these are hardware companies. Yes, they're writing very complex software too, embedded and application and management software as well. But these are hardware companies, and they don't have management. That's not how they run. It's like the real Agile. It's what we see in the hippie but incredibly effective software startups. It's like, well, they're not startups anymore. It's like Netflix, or like how Valve says that they work inside here in Washington State. Or it's a lot closer to Riot Games or Facebook. And you have these great big rooms of people, and they're cross-functional, skillful people, and they're paid according to their skill and not class level. And there's minimal to zero management. Now, to make that work, you need very specific event protocol, meeting protocol. And that's where I think these frameworks come in really, really well. And you get things like LESS and like Scrum at Scale and like parts of the Scaled Agile framework that just can work if they're coached to avoid the hierarchical bits. So at a very large scale, I'd say if the definition of Agile is the Agile Manifesto, and a gating rule of success is how fast the product is able to iterate, which is what Elon Musk says, by the way. He says, in the long duration, the only thing that matters is how fast you iterate. That's it. Like that's it. It does look like very flat organizations, and it looks like these companies work fine with more than 10,000 people at once. So I think so.
Good. Hopefully that was a, yeah, he said thanks. You got a good answer there. Any other questions we have coming in? I know we're coming up on 6. I want you guys going. We can go to a breakout if you want to try it, or if anybody else has any questions.
Can we try that, Rob? Well, here's why I think so, is I would really like for people to introduce themselves to each other. And if everyone tried to do that at once, it'd be just too noisy. So if we join breakout rooms, maybe 3 people could each talk for a minute each. In 3 minutes, they could meet each other. And maybe there's even time for them to say, can we help refine a really good question as a group? And then we might get another really good question that everyone might be interested in per every 3 people, if breakouts work. Now, if we do try this, we're new to the technology stack here, Rob and I, my apologies. We might accidentally hang up on everybody. If that happens, do please reconnect, unless you have to go, but also make sure you've got our email. Mine's on the bottom of the slide, joejustice0@gmail.com, and my Twitter @joejustice0. Rob, what's the best way for people to get in contact with you? With
Yeah, I've emailed everybody a couple times in the past few days. So they've all got my email and contact info. It should work. I'm just going to have to set it up. I think it takes a minute for Zoom to put you into groups. Let me see if I do 11 rooms and there's 33 people. Let's see. And open all rooms. Should be there. You can join if you want. There's breakout rooms. Hopefully this is working. Yes or no?
Hey, Rob, can you hear me?
Yeah, breakout rooms are there. Who's this?
This is Jeff Yaros. I had one other person with me and they didn't stay, or it didn't work.
Yeah, it worked. I think a lot of people decided they didn't want to do it. So I'm closing the rooms in 30 seconds and we'll be back to talk with Joe.
Yeah,
Okay.
Nobody else joined my room.
Same here.
Yeah. I think I got a lot of chat messages privately to me. Everybody's thanking me very much for joining, but they had to bail out at 6 Eastern. So what we'll do is we'll have a smaller group, and we might have an opportunity for you guys to talk with Joe more directly. I think there'd probably be less than 10 people, and yeah, let's see what we've got left.
So Rob, I actually need to leave.
Okay, no problem.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, if any of you guys have any questions directly for Joe, it's your opportunity right now. Otherwise, we'll
Rob,
yes.
I want to super thank you.
Joe, are you open? Are you? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. It's fine.
Oh, I had a question. Do you have maybe a group of finance professionals or accounting professionals who are using Agile that is in finance and accounting?
So in some of these big companies, I've worked with finance and accounting teams, like at Bosch. I've worked with folks who are doing finance and accounting. I'm not aware of a users group or a guide just for that. But what I will say is the procurement piece, which is not exactly what you're talking about, but it's involved. That is quite well developed. And the keyword for that is lean agile procurement. There's others as well, but a keyword for that is lean agile procurement. That's supported by the Flow Days group. And it's not exactly the same, but it's the procurement piece, which is related to finance and accounting's involved. I've gotten to work and learn a lot from accounting and finance groups, but I'm not aware of a place to plug in and meet them. That said, that'd be an interesting topic for a future meetup and to see if anyone shows up and to try to build a community around that. Was that where you were going with this, Tatiana? A community of folks, a place to get?
Because I'm very interested in applying Agile in accounting and finance. We have a lot of projects going on. I have a PMP. I would like to use more of Agile tools and methodologies when I work with IT teams and explaining our business needs and getting better understanding of what happens once we hand it off to IT. So it's just a personal interest of mine, but I also found it very successful to have self-organizing teams, and usually works really well, get accomplished a lot. It doesn't require a lot of management supervision.
I love
people
it.
run with that.
Yes, please. Yes, please. And if you are trying aspects of this, please share to help create a community around it. To the extent you can, please do, because I'm not aware of one now, although I am aware of people who've done it. So you're not alone, but please share so you can find the other folks.
Okay.
I'll facilitate to the extent that I know how.
Okay, that would be great.
Of course.
I can reach out to you on LinkedIn, perhaps.
That may be the best easy step, because other people may respond in addition to just me. So it might take on, especially people I know that I've worked with will see it. So if they're not too busy, they can reply, and that might start to build the community. Thank you, Tatiana, and congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a small group. Ask a question if you have one.
I have a question. My name is Alvin Jessica. Thank you, Joe, for sharing your information. One of my questions is for those, I have a little bit of time, but if there are still efforts out there to volunteer, maybe, I don't know where we're at with the mass. I'm not sure where a lot of the stuff that you were talking about, like for the meta Scrum, because I'm not practicing at this point as of yet. So at least I can volunteer and at least experience some of these Agile principles and practices. So are there opportunities out there where one can at least volunteer their time to help in these efforts, so we can kind of help those in the industry, whether it's automotive or something like that? I'm in finance, but I'm not sure if you have any insight on that.
Well, possibly, since you're in finance, possibly you can help build community with Tatiana. so there's one. I will selfishly say, please join my own nonprofit. That's WikiSpeed, wikispeed.org. And there's a link that says join the team, and please read it and consider it. I would love to have you on the social good efforts that my own nonprofit pursues, which I'm right now doing full time. So this is part of that. This is part of wikispeed.org, sharing what I learned professionally to hopefully help some people. Now, that said, I would love to hear from anyone else on this call if you're aware of places to go for support and volunteering opportunities. If anybody has a place to look, please share it right now. Oh no, we don't know where to look. If you think of it later, please send it to Rob so we can share that out, because I think, Olvin, that's an awesome request. The only one I know is my own nonprofit. So everyone, you're all super invited to join WikiSpeed, Team WikiSpeed on wikispeed.org. It's a 501c3 nonprofit. Please do. Now, that said, as other people become aware of other opportunities to make a difference, please email them to Rob so he can email everybody.
Yes. And if people are watching the video later, it's just Rob, R-O-B, at michigancomputertraining.com. Everybody on the call has it, but if people might watch the video down the road as we post it. Any other questions? I know we're after the 6, but you guys, if Joe is willing, we'll take a couple more questions. Once.
Yeah.
All right, go for it.
I think I'm unmuted. I am going to sort of apologize and also be kind of brave with this one. It's a very off-topic question, although my graduate OM degree was thrilled with your talk. So that was right on target for me. But I will confess.
OM? What's an OM degree? Sorry?
Yeah. I have an MBA with a concentration in operations management.
Ah, okay.
So all of the manufacturing stuff that you talked about is right in my wheelhouse. I have to confess, I am all consumed with an issue right now that I'm sure everybody here has dealt with, but wasn't directly in the content of your talk. And that is, I am an enterprise agile coach that has been asked to help someone who is a huge personality and is a micromanager and has a massive ego, but he thinks he wants to do agile and wants the team to be agile. And so I am dealing with, tiptoeing and, how to couch each message, and everybody in the team is doing the same. And there's a lot of back channel communication between them. What experience have you had in helping someone who thinks that they want help and is themselves the biggest impediment?
Wow, you're so brave, Steve. that's amazing. Well, Steve, as I bet you'd be the first to say to all of us too, that's normal, right? Sure. So in a lot of traditionally run companies, not agile companies, but traditionally run companies, people climb seniority by claiming it and being big and having enough ego to defend themselves strongly all the time at any moment.
Yep.
So management, the higher you go, concentrates itself with that personality type in a lot of traditional companies. Mm-hmm. And that's part of why a lot of people prefer agile, because it's easier to have a meritocracy or any other type of structure at all. So what do we do with this reality that this is totally normal? You're gonna laugh, because I actually think it's what you would say is an OM answer, and it works. But I think this is right up your alley, Steve. In fact, you might be uniquely positioned to have success with this tactic. We explain the interfaces. So this takes a pretty clear understanding of what the inputs and outputs are for each piece of whatever framework you're using. So scaled agile, whichever pieces because scaled agile has a lot of answers in it. So which pieces you're using is probably the effective set. What are the inputs and outputs for big room planning, or for example, you manage, my advice is you manage to the interface. So you go to this person with the big ego, or we're all personality types, right? We trainers that try to think we're global personalities tend to have challenges with this too, and have to check ourselves all the time. So I'm working on it like everybody else, Steve. But you manage the interface. Say for big room planning to start, for example, whatever piece you're using, I need these things from you. And then these are the pieces I need from the team. So what I'd like you to do is protect the team from any influences about these, so they can emerge from the team. Now that's step one. Now step two is, what's the downside of self-managing and empowerment? If I've got a group of kindergartners, so I'm using a straw person argument, but I think it's going to fit. If I've got a group of kindergartners and I say, you're empowered, here's $1,000, set up a lemonade stand. Well, the downside is, the risk is of the straw person is they could just totally throw the money away, or make paper footballs out of the money and put it down the garbage disposal. They could be inefficient or abusive to the funds. And that's why we have regulation functions within traditional companies. Now, the problem is it creates slowdown and crushes team spirit and ruins morale and all kinds of other problems. But the idea is enforce responsibility with the funds. So if you're talking to this personality and saying, look, I only need you to be engaged in this, and I need you to help me protect the team so they can develop these things, then it's also, but the teams owe you. This starts to quell their spirit. The teams owe you effective use of funds with the decisions they make. So I'm going to ask you to help me protect them from any influence as they come up with their plan, as they come up with their how. But if their how is inefficient, you have full veto rights to present a new plan. Now that's required, because otherwise the teams can just squander the money. And empowerment is awesome, but we're not going to be silly on purpose. So managing to the interface and then explaining what the worst case or off the rails scenario is, and saying, and I'm there to help you engage to rescue this if it becomes a real mess. I've had wonderful success with attempting that approach. Now, that could go the wrong way too. So we've got to have our Agile values as strong in us as we possibly can, so that if we say, yes, this is off the rails, let me bring you in to help save the day, that is a recipe for top-down hierarchical management and crushing team spirit, right? So when we do that, if it did go off the rails, when we're inviting that strong personality in to do what they do well, to help fight the fire, because you might, we've got to do that with our Agile values as leading us. And how can I say it? This is where expert coaching happens, because you can't follow a script on that one anymore. And it's saying, yeah, we need to fight a fire, but we need to do it in a way that's as respectful and healthy and loving as possible. Otherwise, we're going to have a morale catastrophe. Now, it might never happen. The teams might be financially prudent, but explaining what the intervention is lets people know when they need to put their firefighting pants on, whether they ever need to or not. Now that said, we've got a group of skillful people all around, including you, Steve. So I'd like to hear other answers to that same question, including your own, Steve. I'm ready to learn.
Well, I'll say this. I feel very good about a lot of what you said, because it kind of echoed where I was already at. So that was reassuring. And we just had the opportunity to do a full day of training, and a lot of our outside stakeholders joined. So one of the major things that I covered was the history of Taylorism through Deming through now. I covered, a lot of that, and I contrasted and made specific note of what is an input, like lines of code, and what's an output, like a status check, this is where I am, and that we don't care about either of those. What we want is outcomes, and only outcomes. And so I'm establishing that framework so that every conversation now I can say, this thing you're trying to do, is that an input? Is that an output? Or is it an outcome? And so I'm working towards that. But I made a lot of notes while you were talking, and it gave me a lot to think about. So I think there's a lot of good stuff there that I can use.
Well, I love it, Steve. And I'll try to take this opportunity to couch what you just said in a hardware context, because it's the same thing. Many of us have seen the example of a VCR remote with many, many, many unused buttons, and say it's true in hardware too. There's this idea, well, did we build that new hardware feature? Did we build that new hardware capability? It's the same problem as software, and it's measuring the wrong thing. It's measuring project completion, not outcome.
Yep.
So because this is how Agilists can drive the manufacturer's response to COVID, I'll map, Steve, the solution you're presenting there, and I think you're awesome with that one, is exactly the one that I'm trying to bring into all these other hardware companies. And in some cases having great success, and in some cases it's not matching yet. The mind is too different. But it's the same. It's what's the outcome we want this next truck to achieve. And there is where the radical profitability is.
Yeah, my view is that the background Taylorism that people may be steeped in without even knowing the word Taylor, there's just an assumption that there's a simple heuristic. If I just push inputs, more people, more hours, work faster, just input, just shove it up, the assumption is that that's going to translate to an outcome or an output that they want. And so I'm trying to break that down and say, are you sure this input leads to this output? And are you sure that that output leads to this outcome? And, and try to find alternative ways to say, tell me the outcome you want and trust the team to get to it.
It sounds like you're touching on Brooks' Law as well there. So if you haven't brought that up with the group yet, from the Mythical Man Month, which is a book about software.
Absolutely.
But Brooks' Law was actually mined from hardware. And it's amazing how these are really the same world. But that adding people to a late project only makes it later is Brooks' Law. Making that part of the conversation may start to create the Agile mindset. And then the evidence that the Agile mindset's working. So why that? I think is the important way to lead, especially when we're dealing with leadership, which is so we release faster stuff that people want. And that's the definition of, is Agile working or not? So by that definition, SpaceX is the most agile rocket company on the planet. And yeah, that we can gauge the agile effectiveness that way. What's the iteration time?
Good deal. So, wow, we're coming up on like an hour and 10 minutes, hour and 15 minutes. Unless anybody has any more questions, I'd say thank you to everybody. This was the chat the chats I've been getting, the messages have been great. So I think hopefully you guys all got a lot out of it, and I appreciate you guys, especially you guys coming back after the breakouts. I know a lot of people had to go. It's dinner time here, but I will email everybody. I'll keep in touch with everybody. Joe's going to be here, in August. Well, hopefully. It could very well be virtual.
Yeah, it'll be remote or in person. Now, folks, every business has been totally disrupted by this. And I'll say this was a heck of a time for me to launch a new small business, which I did right before COVID started. I'd ask you to do me a favor. Please think if there's anyone you know that would benefit from Agile in manufacturing or hardware in general, design, the management of it. We will talk about finance, Tatiana. And please consider recommending them to the class Rob's hosting that I'm going to come out and teach or do online, depending whatever we have to do in August. My small business needs it too, just like we all do. And depending on what the economy is like, it'll mean a lot. So I do think this is the right work, the right solution. I think it's going to help a lot of companies make more money so they can keep more jobs, which is, in my opinion, the goal of a company, is to give a lot of people work and help them be happy. And to do that, they've got to make a ton of money so they can hire a ton of people and help them be happy. And I think this will do it. So consider who you know that might benefit for agility in any of the pieces of hardware: suppliers, management, contract writing, the manufacturing of it, shift management, shop floor, all of the above. And consider recommending the course Rob's running that I'm going to teach in August. Rob, where do they see the details of that course, especially for people watching this on YouTube later?
Yeah, it's MichiganAgileTraining.com. MichiganAgileTraining.com. If they can't make August one, we could always do a private virtual workshop. Those can be fun too, where you really, some companies like it where they can talk about private information without everybody else listening in. So we could do both ways. And coaching too, it's all there. But anyways, thanks guys. I really appreciate you guys joining us, and let's keep in touch. All right. And if you want, next week, I've got another meetup. Joe is gonna, he'll help out down the road, but Ryan Ripley's going to talk about liberating structures, which is going to be next Wednesday night. So we're good. Thanks guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.